Apartheid in Afrikaans means apartness. South Africa was colonized by European powers who imposed the idea of apartheid or segregation. The Great Depression and World War II brought hard times to South Africa. The government then strengthened the racial segregation and gave many of the white or blanks the jobs of the blacks. Apartheid in reality began when the black South African people were officially segregated in the 1950s, when marriage between whites and peoples of different races was prohibited. Sexual relations between black and white South Africans were banned and restricted. The Population Registration Act of 1950 classified all South Africans by race. In some of the cases, the legislation split families in half as a result of a white mother and black father who had colored children. Land acts were also added, which required non-whites to carry documents showing they are allowed in certain areas. Public facilities were set up for a separation of whites and non-whites. The Prime Minister, Dr. Hendrik Verwoerd, in 1958 filtered a system in which he called separate development. This development separated many Bantus, creating 10 different lands for the Bantu tribes called Bantustans. By separating black South Africans from one another, it empowered the government to say there wasn't any black majority and made sure that the blacks wouldn't unify together. All of the black South Africans were named as a citizen in one of the Bantustans, and the system was said to give them full political rights, but it only removed them from the nation's political body. Another aspect of apartheid was that the government made the black South Africans move from places labeled publicly as white to the homelands, and the government sold the black South Africans lands at very low prices to white farmers. In 1961 to 1994, 3.5 million people were removed by force from their homes and put in the separate developments, or the Bantustans, where they had no form of work or money to feed their families. Many people opposed the idea of segregation, including whites and non-whites. Protests took many shapes, from nonviolent protests to strikes, and eventually came to armed resistance. Many groups who were organized were arrested and convicted of high treason and were sentenced to a life in prison or the death penalty. In the black township of Sharpsville in 1960, the police opened fire at a group of unarmed blacks. The non-white group had arrived at the police station without the passes they were required to carry, but showed resistance and willingness to go to prison. 67 blacks were killed and more than 150 wounded. Sharpsville, after the incident, convinced many anti-apartheid leaders that they couldn't gain peace with peace and encouraged violence. Hector Peterson was one of the 566 schoolchildren shot at the Soweto High School protest. A fellow student ran, carrying Hector Peterson's body to the nearest hospital, with Hector's sister beside the runner. The photographer, Sam Nisma, recalled this event. "I saw a child fall down. Under a shower of bullets, I rushed forward and went for the picture. It had been a peaceful march. The children were told to disperse, and they started singing Nkuso Sikelele. The police were ordered to shoot." The schoolchildren had been protesting the force of Afrikaans language, which was a requirement to be learned at some of the schools. Afrikaans is a white language, a mix of different African languages and Dutch. There is a museum for the youth who died that named after Hector Peterson. In one protest against apartheid, a man named Nelson Mandela publicly burned his pass. These passes were required to be carried by all black men, and they were not allowed to leave their own district and homes without a pass. Nelson Mandela was born in the Madiba clan on July 18, 1918. Even as a small child, he wanted to end the struggle of segregation. Nelson Mandela went to many different colleges, although never completing in a major until later in his life. In the 1950s, he was very interested in politics and the fight for the abolishment of apartheid. He was in many protests, including publicly burning his passbook, which restricted him on where he was to go. Mandela was married 3 times, but was divorced twice. Nelson Mandela was arrested on the 5th of December in 1955 for treason. 28 other blacks were accused. While facing the death penalty, his words to the court at the end of his famous speech from the dock on April 20th, 1964 became well known. "I have fought against white domination. I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Nelson Mandela lived and spent 27 years in prison. If you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. Then he becomes your partner. In 1991, Mandela became the first black president, and in 1993, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Mandela was elected as president of South Africa in 1991 because Tambo, the president at the time, was in poor health and died 2 years later. Mandela de Klerk, who both wanted a peaceful solution to South Africans' problems, met with different representatives of most of the political groups in the country with the goal to create a new constitution. These negotiations took place, and through persuasive and escalating violence in Natal, Africa was free and the non-whites free again. Although there was still some segregation, people came together again. Nelson Mandela died on December 5, 2013, at age 95. He was known as the compass for South Africa, a freedom fighter, the son of South Africa, the father of South Africa, and the one who freed Africa from segregation and violence. People from all over the country mourned or cheered, mourning his death and cheering for the life he lived and what he gave to South Africans. Mandela was laid to rest in his home village, Kunu. There was 10 days of mourning for the lost Mandela. Mandela's legacy was his imprisonment for 27 years for defying the racist apartheid government that led South Africa for many years. He emerged from prison in 1990 and became South Africa's first black president 4 years later, while showing forgiveness and also asking for forgiveness.